Welcome to the Clutch Kitten Gaming Podcast, where I play an indie game for 5 hours and let you know whether or not it's worth your time and money. Hello and welcome everyone, this is James, also known as Clutch Kitten, and I am so glad that you're here for episode 59 of the show. I actually cannot believe we're already into November. Maybe it's just me, but this year is flying by, and good games do not cease to be released. It's also crazy to think of the sheer volume of indie games we've looked at in this year alone. As always, I want to quickly remind you of a couple wonderful ways you can support the show and get more plugged in. The first and primary way you can support what I'm doing here is to tell your friends. The second way is to head over to Apple Podcasts to give the show a 5-star review. Beyond those things, I would love it if you reached out and said hi. The easiest places to reach me are on Instagram at klutchkittengaming and via email at klutchkittengaming@gmail.com. Remember, Clutch is spelled with a K. In the news this week, China is imposing a curfew on online games for minors. According to the CNN article written by Eric Chung, these new regulations, which are for gamers under 18, allow for 90 minutes of online gaming per weekday, so Monday through Friday, and 3 hours of online gaming per weekend day, so Saturday and Sunday you get 3 hours each day. And online gaming is also banned between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. every day for those minors. In addition, there are limits on the amount of money these kids can transfer to their online gaming accounts each month. If you're between 8 and 16, you can transfer up to $29, and if you're between 16 and 18, you can transfer up to $57. All of these regulations are being put into effect with the hope of, quote, protecting the physical and mental health of minors. Seeing this news wasn't all that surprising, but the whole concept of governing bodies putting these type of regulations on video games is insane to me. I mean, rules like that probably will help a lot of kids live a more balanced lifestyle, but how are these regulations going to be enforced? And maybe I'm just pointing out the elephant in the room, but shouldn't it be the parents' job to help their children build healthy gaming habits? Sure, I don't live in China and I'm not a minor, so these regulations don't affect me all that much, but it's still a very interesting development. Anyways, let's move on now to this week's game. Today we're going to be talking about The Outer Worlds, which is a first-person RPG developed by Obsidian Entertainment. If you're at all familiar with Obsidian, you're probably raising an eyebrow at my choice of this game. Wasn't Obsidian acquired by Microsoft in 2018? That would make them very much not independent. If that's what you're thinking, you're absolutely right. However, I'm using some technicalities to justify this game for the show. Although Obsidian is no longer independent, this game was started while they were still independent, and it's actually not published by Microsoft. It's still being published by Private Division, which is a subset of Take-Two Interactive devoted to funding and publishing indie games from small and mid-sized studios. In the end, I really just wanted an excuse to play this game and talk about it on the show, so I hope you'll forgive me for wedging this game into the mix. To give you a bit more background on Obsidian, this studio was founded in 2003 in Irvine, California, by a bunch of ex-Black Isle Studio employees. Fergus Urquhart, Chris Avallone, Chris Parker, Darren Monahan, and Chris Jones. If Obsidian is categorized in your mind as a AAA studio, the reason is probably due to the amount of licensed games that they've developed. Two of the big ones are Fallout New Vegas and South Park: The Stick of Truth. That being said, this studio hasn't been a one-trick pony when it comes to developing licensed games. They've developed some of their own IP, including the CRPGs Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. I'm sure that hearing just a few of these games makes it pretty obvious why Microsoft swooped in to get this studio. They've put out some masterpieces. In terms of The Outer Worlds, it was released on October 25th of 2019 on PC, Xbox, and PS4 for $60, and it's supposedly coming to Switch in the future as well. According to HowLongToBeat.com, it takes anywhere from 10.5 to 32.5 hours to beat. I've heard people taking even longer or shorter, but the main thing to realize here is that there's a lot of choice in how you play this game. You can blitz through the experience, but most people will probably fall in the 20 to 30 hour marks. I'm personally in a little bit over 10 hours, and I still feel like there's a sizable chunk of the game to go. Let's move on now to the narrative. Where the hell am I? Last thing I remember, I was climbing into a cryo chamber for my flight to Halcyon, but something seems off. I'm not being greeted by annoying corporate representatives. Instead, this weird-looking scientist named Phineas is yapping on and on about how the ship had a malfunction with its faster-than-light system. How long has this ship been lost in space? In The Outer Worlds, your character wakes up to the reality that their colony ship has been drifting through space for a long time, and it's up to you to find out why. Unlike many other portrayals of space in the future, The Outer Worlds depicts a society rooted in hyper-capitalism and ruled by corporations. Chances are that you've complained about the likes of Walmart or, say, Blizzard before, but imagine that these companies owned entire planets. When you arrive at your first colony in the game, you're quickly put face to face with this reality. One of the earliest conversations you have involves a character who speaks normally with you in one moment, and in the next, they start reciting copy for the corporation that owns their particular colony. In The Outer Worlds, corporations are king, people are assets, and it's up to you to decide how you'll respond. Based on the decisions you make throughout the game, the main storyline will curve in a number of directions. This leads into the gigantic topic of player agency within The Outer Worlds. Right off the bat, you can see the tension of the narrative. Are you going to side with the board and enforce the capitalist mecha? Or are you going to help Phineas fight against the corporations to bring change to Halcyon? It seems pretty straightforward, but what's brilliant about Obsidian's world building is that there's a lot more nuance than meets the eye. For example, early on you get to make a pretty big decision. Do you want to cut the power from one of the corporate factories, or do you want to cut the power from a village filled with deserters? When you first talk to the factory boss, he comes across as a complete sleazebag. When I had that conversation, my decision was made. All the corporate drones could go to hell for all I cared. But wait, right before I cut power to the factory, my companion mentioned a little-known fact that the whole town would be out of work if I proceeded. I ended up sticking with my guns, but sure enough, when I entered the factory later, everything was shut down and I overheard people wondering what they were going to do for work. As you continue through the game, there are similar key decisions that have to be made. But I think the real beauty of the experience shows itself in the regular, small dialogue choices that you have to take. Nearly every conversation you have feels like a puzzle to be solved. How do you converse with this person in order to get exactly what you want or need? Additionally, depending on how you spec your character, unique narrative paths will emerge. If you boost your medical skill enough, you might be able to help a scientist solve a problem. If you boost your intimidate skill enough, you might be able to scare off a foe. If you neglect your speech stat enough, you might unlock the ability to play the conversation completely dumb. Or, if you could care less, you can just kill whoever you're talking with. It's through all of those small interactions that the world of Halcyon is developed, and the high quality of writing is also showcased in the thousands of lines that are available to hear. Although player choice is incredible and interesting, my companion interactions were what stood out to me as the most novel. The unfortunate thing about companion mechanics in most games is that they're inconsequential at best and game-breaking at worst. Thankfully, The Outer Worlds takes a step in the right direction. There were still times where I found my companions to be obnoxious in the sense that they would start fighting before I wanted, but overall, they were a positive addition to the game. We'll talk about their gameplay impact soon enough, but where they impacted the conversations was the coolest thing. As you speak with different NPCs, there will be points where your companion might chime in. Maybe they know the NPC and will bring up something that happened in their past, or maybe your companion disagrees with you and will soften your point. When one of my companions first spoke up in a conversation, I was pleasantly surprised. It made those interactions and choices even more dynamic, and it made me want to find out more about my companions as well. To conclude this section, Obsidian did an incredible job with narrative and world building. Everything from the setting to the theme to the intricate conversational choices kept me moving forward and wanting more. So the narrative is clearly incredible, but how does the gameplay hold up? Let me put it this way. If you enjoy the combat in most Fallout games, and I'm not talking about Fallout 76, you'll probably enjoy the combat in the Outer Worlds. Although the setting is vastly different from Fallout, it's easy to see the roots that Obsidian has in that universe. I found that combat flowed a bit quicker, but this game even has a VATS equivalent called time dilation. When you activate time dilation, everything slows down, and you're able to unload a clip into an enemy or get multiple swings off with a melee weapon before they can even blink. You can also target specific limbs to do unique effects. For example, if you shoot the enemy's face, it'll blind them, and if you hit a leg, they'll be crippled. Just like Fallout, combat turns into a dance of managing your time dilation meter in order to maximize the damage you can do and minimize the damage you take. Before we get too far down the rabbit hole of comparing everything to Fallout, let's zoom out and touch on a few unique strengths of gameplay and a couple weaknesses. Bear in mind that these aren't the only strengths, they're just a few that stood out to me. The first strength is big. The Outer Worlds lets you play exactly how you want. Just like with the conversational choices, you have so many options in this game. Do you want to be a burly bruiser who wields a sledgehammer? Do you want to be a nimble assassin who sneaks around and kills enemies from afar? Do you want to be a support character who deals most of their damage through their companions? You can play however you want, and you're able to invest in the skills and perks that support that playstyle. Just about every time you level up, you're granted 10 points to allot to different skills. Everything from melee to ranged to tech to leadership. Within each of those core skills, there are 3 sub-skills. For example, with the ranged skill, there are stats assigned to handguns, long guns, and heavy weapons. Once you level up the core ranged skill enough, you're able to start assigning skill points to specific sub-skills in order to specialize your character even more. Along with those points come amazing passive abilities which can really impact what you're able to do. On top of the skill tree is a perk tree which allows you to unlock things like additional health, more damage, a larger time dilation bar, and a whole lot more. I say all that to illustrate the sheer amount of customizability you have for your character. What's even better is that the build choices you make directly impact what you're able to do and not do in the world. You're able to approach most missions from all sorts of angles, and your build really affects what directions you can take. For example, in one mission, I needed to get into a base to find dirt on a character, and even just the act of getting into the base opened up all sorts of possibilities. I could talk my way in and use a cloaking device to sneak around, which is best accomplished with decent speech skills. I could brute force my way in and just kill everyone I see, which is best accomplished with some strong defense skills. Or I could hack into the sewers and worm my way into a back entrance, which obviously requires some level of tech. And again, those options were just for getting into the outpost. There were plenty more options for actually carrying out the mission itself. The second strength I want to discuss is again related to companions. Not only do companions strengthen the overall narrative, they can also be an integral part of combat. There's a whole set of perks and skills which are specifically there to strengthen your companions, and playing as a support character is actually feasible and a ton of fun. One of my favorite additions that companions brought were their abilities. Each companion has a unique cooldown tied ability which you have control over. One individual does a really powerful pistol shot, another performs a devastating railgun attack, and so on. What's interesting about this system is that you're able to use it both offensively and defensively. If I was near death and a monster was in the middle of swinging its claw at my face, I could activate an ability to essentially stagger the enemy and give myself enough time to heal myself or kill it. The third strength of gameplay that I want to mention is in the game structure. You aren't playing on one gigantic open world like Fallout 4. Instead, you get to travel around between a bunch of smaller planets and colonies. To be fair, some of the planets are still pretty large, but it felt like it could actually explore the entire place without spending 20 hours. I believe some of this design is tied to the budget that Obsidian had, but it ended up being a real boon for the game. Sometimes designers take a bigger is better approach to structuring worlds, and more often than not, that's actually not beneficial. Those games tend to become overwhelming and burn players out before they're able to see everything that's available. The Outer Worlds strikes a delicate balance where the biomes feel expansive and explorable without feeling overwhelming and monotonous. When it comes to gameplay weaknesses, there were a couple small things that came to mind. First off, sneaking doesn't feel as impactful as I would like. This is a hard one to explain, but ever since I played Skyrim, I'm always trying to see if other sneak mechanics live up. No matter how many times I try to sneak around in the Outer Worlds, it never felt quite right. And I attribute a lot of that to the HUD, the heads-up display. In Skyrim, there's a subtle indicator that shows whether or not you're seen. If you're sneaking, there are 2 lines and a dot, and if you're seen, those open up into an eyeball. It's simple, yet incredibly helpful. From what I could tell, the Outer Worlds didn't have an indicator like this, so when I would try to steal an item out of a locker or someone's pocket, I was never 100% confident that I was unseen. There is an NPC indicator which tells you if they're aware of a threat, but if an enemy isn't in view, it's not always clear. This may seem insanely nitpicky, but it did affect my time trying to sneak. The other weakness that stood out to me was the usefulness of consumables. Just like most open world games, you end up looting a metric ton of random stuff. Plates, soda, pictures of a character's grandma, stuff like that. One thing I actually loved was how you could hold down one button to sell all your junk at vendors, but as the game went on, I found myself collecting more and more consumables, and I never once felt the need to use them. There's an argument to be made that if I was on a higher difficulty, I would have dug into the consumables out of necessity, but my issue probably has more to do with the game's lack of education regarding those consumables. I was told how to heal myself, but that's about it. It's not like my time was ruined as a result, but it made looting anything apart from weapons, armors, and mods pretty much meaningless to me. Despite those couple complaints, the gameplay was solid overall. It felt new in some interesting ways, while still bringing back those Fallout feels. Now that we've made it through the narrative and gameplay, let's discuss the art and sound design. On the art side, this game looks great. I wasn't constantly wowed by what I saw, but in terms of the game running well and being pleasant to look at, it achieved those goals. The world is colorful, the character models look good, and there isn't a lot to complain about. You're always going to run into funny looking animations or small glitches in games like this, but in terms of game-breaking bugs, The Outer Worlds seems pretty clean. I wasn't the biggest fan of the UI for menus, and I already mentioned my issue with the HUD, but I don't want to beat a dead horse. Neither of those complaints are worth boycotting the game over. When it comes to the sound design, I honestly have no complaints. The soundtrack consists of a lot of ambient orchestral music, which sets a perfect tone for the game. The music instills a sense of adventure and mystery, which is exactly what's needed for a game set in space. The VO is also top notch. It's pretty hard for me to know where to start in evaluating a game like this since it has so much VO, but my overall feeling was positive. Most of the voices were performed well, and I can't recall any VO that felt way out of place. Now that we've made it through the narrative, gameplay, art and sound design, let's summarize with some positives and negatives. First off, on the positive side, the world building and writing is superb. The premise is intriguing, the world is engrossing, and the writing is witty. Even the quest names were funny and fit the theme. Second, the level of player agency made this game feel limitless. From the dialogue to the combat to the way you build your character, you're able to craft your experience exactly the way you want. Third, the game felt polished in a wholly unexpected way. Whether you're talking about Bethesda's or Obsidian's Fallout, those old games came with a lot of jank. With that in mind, The Outer Worlds stands out as a much cleaner experience right out of the gate. It looks good, sounds great, feels solid, and so far, it performs as well as I could hope. First off, on the negative side, I would have liked the HUD and UI to be cleaned up just a hair. Like I've already mentioned with sneaking, I think some aspects could have been improved. Second, consumables in this game feel absolutely useless. I don't think the system needs to be integral to the game, but I think there needs to be some sort of incentive to even engage with it. We've made it now to the final boss. This is the part of the podcast where I let you know whether you should slay the game and buy it, flee the game and avoid it, or farm up and wait for a sale. My verdict for The Outer Worlds is to slay this game. If you're sitting there still bemoaning the money you spent on Fallout 76, but have still been craving a solid first-person RPG that you can sink your teeth into, this is the game for you. The Outer Worlds feels both new and old in all the ways you could want. As always, thank you all so much for taking the time to listen in. Hopefully you enjoyed listening and found value in what I had to say. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you in game.